All right, welcome everybody. I am Paddo. With me is Atlanta and a new co-host, Elmanbeastio. We're going to be breaking down patch 0.0.26, and we're going to kick it off right off the bat with some brand new Vanar cards. Yes, out of the gates, all of you wanted more removal, and we kind of got it here. Hailstone Prison, return a minion to its owner's action bar. Cryogenesis, deal 4 damage. Now you get to dig for Frost, so more Frost energy. And then Winterblade is going to add a little bit of attack with some ability to stun minions. So first off, I'm going to pass this over to Atlanta. Looking at these brand new cards, what do you think this is going to do for Vanar as a faction?
Well, at least with these first set of new card additions, I really like Hailstone Prison. Feels like it's a card that would help Vanar's early game a lot, because sometimes they struggle early game, or at least like transitioning towards their later phases of the game smoothly, and this seems like a really, really strong tempo swing that they can use from a spell, because most of Vanar's spells don't control the board particularly well, such as Chromatic Cold is kind of inefficient, and Avalanche is very conditional, and so I feel like Hailstone Prison really fits into the like one and done, use a spell on a minion's done for a while. Even if they can replay it, it's usually not worth it, or it takes a lot out of them, because then that minion can't attack again, so it's effectively a removal. Cryogenesis, also like it a lot, gives Frost a little bit of card draw. I'd say even if you didn't necessarily have a full Frost deck, you could still use Cryogenesis to draw you any card, like as long as, or any Frost minion, and you could replace it, so it's essentially draw any card. Or rather, draw a card. So I really like that they're giving Vanar a bit of card draw. And Winterblade seems like it synergizes pretty well with Coldbiter, the other artifact, but I feel like you would otherwise run out of charges pretty quickly using it to freeze minions with. So I think that's pretty much my take on the new Vanar cards.
Yeah, Elmanbeastio, do you have any cards that really stand out to you?
Yeah, the Hailstone, like, the tempo swing, I looked at it more as like a late game tempo swing, because like I always look at spell costs with Mana Forger, right? That's been a big thing for me that I always talk about. And when you play Hailstone Prison for 1 or 0 on something like an Ironclad Guardian or Elix Stormblade, it's like huge tempo in the game. So like that's how I was looking at it. And then the other thing about it was every time I look at removal, I think about whether it acts as a dispel, sort of. Like, for example, if you Onyx Bear something, it turns into the bear, right? Yeah. So they don't get Dying Wish or effects like that, right? Or on damage, anything like that, right? So when you return something to hand, it's like a clean kill, no Dying Wish, no nothing, no interaction with anything. Just go back to hand, get the tempo, and keep moving from there. And for 1 or 0 mana, even for 2, it's like ridiculous, but a 1 or 0 will be even more OP, I think. Yeah. So amazing card, I think.
Yeah, very strong card, and definitely some new toys that lots of Vanar players will be very happy about. So expect them to spike up a little bit here, as a lot of players have some new collections and a bunch of spirit to throw around. But moving on to some Vanar changes, Aspect of the Fox no longer going to be able to get that celerity guy, but it is going to cost 1 less. Snow Chaser, losing the Frenzy, but now actually can come back to your hand. Cool synergy there. Crystal Wisp, a card that a lot of people have been wanting to change for a long time, almost kind of gets the Celerity Worm treatment, and the fact that now it actually goes to a single faction. So now Vanar is the holder of the Crystal Wisp. And Wolfraven, going to get its cost dropped a little bit here, so it becomes a little bit more competitive and playable, knocking out that really contested 4 slot for Vanar. But I'm going to pass this over to Elmanbeastio. What do you feel like these changes? What has you excited about these changes?
All right, so if you see me play Vanar, I've always talked about how all the aspects can be used on either minion, in either player's minions, right? So, again, take a big minion, fox it, and now it's a 3/3 weakling. Your opponent spend like 5, 6, 7 mana, and you just attack it, or Coldbiter, or anything, right? So aspect losing celerity, it loses like the rush down of Vanar, like that people are used to, and it loses the boundless courage combos kind of, but you gain one of the best removes in the game now costs 1, so it's like insane for control Vanar, I think. The Wolverine, it's interesting because just having flying lets you go to the infiltrate side of the board. And so you'll play on 3, which could be on turn 1 if you're second player, and then immediately infiltrate on the other side, which it could be possible, right? So that could be a thing. I'm not sure if how contested the 3 spot is right now for Vanar, but that could be a thing. And then the Crystal Wisp, again, like you said, a lot of people have complained about it. I've complained about it infinite times. One of the things that I complained about was there's no counterplay. It comes into play, your turns are better pretty much the whole game, right? Because not a lot of games go past the 9th crystal, the 9th mana. So you're like, Crystal Wisp, my turns are better forever. And there's no counterplay, and it can grab mana tiles, whatever, right? The usual complaints. Now that it's Dying Wish, it's a lot fairer, but it's still, it gives ramp to probably the only faction that didn't have ramp, and it has counterplay. But at the same time, now that it's Dying Wish, if you aspect that Crystal Wisp, you won't get the Dying Wish because it became a different creature. So we'll have to see how often that comes into play, if you actually get the ramp or not. And then the last one, Chaser, right? I actually really like this Infiltrate change because I actually played the Snow Chaser, and you only get his Frenzy like once every 10 games. So your opponent had to miss position, you have to be on the Infiltrate side, he had to survive a turn, and usually you need to place him really far away and then fly him over with Aspect of the Drake, and that's how you got your Frenzy, right? So basically, the stars have to align for you to get that Frenzy on him. And he dies to any ping, like even a Flash Freeze, which costs 0. So it was 1 in 10 games, obviously not consistent, not good. I don't know what people's mileage with that card was, but this new one, way better because it's a consistent threat. And just having that consistent threat, you can't ignore it because it aspects into another bigger creature, or it just keeps whittling at you anyways. So I really like this change.
Yeah, definitely overall some really great buffs. And again, more reasons for stuff to start soaring, at least for the Vanar players. Now, moving on to some new card changes just in general. It's not all Vanar this patch. We also have Earth Sphere going to 8 health instead of 10. And Duelyst is going to have its cost lowered to 4 out of that 5 range. And so making it a little bit better value overall. So Atlanta, I'm going to pass this one over to you. What does this Earth Sphere change mean? And then is Duelyst a card that you might see played now?
Well, Duelyst has a really interesting stat line for a 4-drop in that it's 5/2. I mean, the only other neutral that has 5 attack on 4, I think, is Chassis of Mechazor. And so they have a lot different effects in that sense. And I think Duelyst could be interesting in something like maybe a Lionar deck could use it, or maybe even Magmar, honestly. Because you can buff the Tombstone, and then maybe you can use that to fight instead, since the Tombstone can still move and all that. And as far as the package of stats, now I think of all 4 drops, it's got to have the highest package of stats by miles. So that's what you're really looking at when you want to play that card, is how many stats can I utilize. But it's also weak to dispelling effects and other forms of removal. And it's not necessarily going to be an end-all, be-all of 4-drops. And a lot of 4-drops want to do something when they hit the board, and this is another one that doesn't. So it could see play, but it's got a lot of drawbacks. And so I think that the cost being reduced to 4 is a pretty fair change to it, although I think that it doesn't solve all of its problems. So we'll see what people come up with that card. And Earthsphere going to 8 probably just helps out for those that want to try to burn down a Magmar, because if you try to go all the way late game against a Control Magmar, you're probably going to lose. And I'm seeing a lot more Control Magmar as we continue to gain more cards overall. And so I feel like this change really kind of hedges that near invincibility that Magmar had at some phases of the game, where your only option was to just dump damage into them and hope that they didn't have Earth Spear, and it didn't feel very good to just hope that they don't have their green numbers to beat your red numbers, you know? And since we've toned down a lot of the burst, or it seems like there's a lot less burst in the game currently, at least compared to last patch with Songhai, feels like Earth Sphere can afford to be reduced, because now it's not about this can avoid you from being 100 0'd at 20 health or whatever. And now it's like, okay, well, that didn't really change that case, but it changed a lot of the other cases of Earth Sphere where you spent your entire game dealing half of their health and the Earth Spirit for 4 mana, but it might have costed you 10 plus to deal that damage. So, I like the change.
Yeah, definitely. So, to round this patch out, because this is a very heavy Vanar patch. So, first question is, like, I'll pass this to both of you, is does this now move them into like a driver's seat to be a power faction? Like, does this move them up the rankings? Because a lot of people consider them to be one of the weaker factions, if they are or not. And then the other question is like, do you see like control being played out of these card changes, or what kind of styles do you see? Elmanbeastio, what do you think on that?
Alright, so yeah, I think the changes are huge to Vanar, and they definitely moved up a lot of ranks in my book. If you ask me before this patch, I would say Songhai, Abyss, and Magmar have been the 3 best factions. I'll actually add a little bit to after, but they've been the 3 best to me, right? Before the last wipe, it was those 3. People couldn't really use Vitruvian too well, but I was always afraid of Vitruvian because of the Stars Fury Science Derwish combo. So I always said these 3 factions, Abyss and Magmar, Songhai are the 3 best, and Vitruvian is like the hidden 4th contender that no one can play. And then we had that wipe, and everyone got all the cards, and it's like, oh my god, we're back to getting blasted by Vitruvian and the Stars Fury combos, right? So those 4 are kind of contending, and it kind of left Lionar and Vanar in the dust, in my opinion. And then I feel like Vanar just set us up with this patch to potentially be a ridiculous control deck, because now they have removal for 1, or soft removal sort of for 1 with the new aspect, and the Hailstone is such a huge tempo swing that it might be hard removal in many cases, right? Like, you can't drop Dark Nemesis for 7 and have it Hailstone Prison and like just be like, well, I guess I just redrop it, right? That's like an insane tempo loss. So in some cases, the Hailstone Prison might flat out win games. I think Vanar just has control, just skyrocketed a lot. The Fox losing Celerity lost them a lot of burst, which is another thing. So maybe people won't even be able to do rush. I'm not sure. I don't fully agree with that, but they lost a lot of rush potential, that's what I should say, actually. For the Without Genesis, like Atlanta said, you can just replace for card draw. You get that Frost minion, and you can just replace and draw. But at the same time, you might also see something like a Toolbox Banner, where the card Genesis can grab 3 different one-off Frost creatures, maybe, and because that card will always give it to you, it's like you have 4 copies of each of them, kind of thing. So that could be a thing. And then with the Crystal Wisp mana change, much fairer. Would like to test it, see if the Dying Wish affects it too much or not. But I'm just hype. I'm hyped for the other decks because I get 3 deck space, and I've been saying this for months. And I'm hyped for Vanna because they potentially needed the ramp more than anyone else, but they didn't have any, and then they need a board to apply their other tricks. So a lot of their combos are expensive in that sense. So getting the ramp actually helps out a lot.
So Atlanta, do you think this vaults Vanar now into the power category? Can they vie for the top?
Yeah, I think before changes, their only win conditions were Fox combos and basically Razorback Jacks. And when you take those away in a vacuum, you're not left with much. And now we have a little bit more in Vanar to work with in order to push win conditions with. The issue, though, is that now I would say Vanar's win condition overall is a lot slower because they don't have combos. So they need to focus a lot more on the board than they did before, and that's gonna create some interesting gameplay because now we actually have a creature that is completely sticky unless unless they dispel it and then kill it, and we're gonna have 3 of those, maybe 3 Sarlaccs. It's gonna be really hard to utilize the spell just to kill Snow Chaser. So you're always at least gonna have 1 minion that can continue to come back to use Aspect on. Like Elman said, use Mountain on a really cheap creature is really nice to take the board back because otherwise you had to have had the board already. And in some cases, just mountaining isn't even enough, even from your hand. And so now you can do it potentially even on board just because you're more likely to have one. But one of the biggest changes, I think, at least to Wisp going to Vanar, is that nobody else is going to have Wisp anymore. And so this is going to change I think it's going to change the whole scape of the game, to be honest. Because now every sort of control deck that relied on Wisp to gain or to accelerate towards their higher cost creatures is not going to be able to get to those high cost creatures consistently. And you still have things like Flash Reincarnation and Darkfire Sacrifice, but those are basically the only things now for acceleration of creatures. And acceleration of spells just goes to Songhai and Mana Forger, which is fine, I suppose, but it just hurts their control aspects a lot more. And so I feel like most decks are going to be playing to almost exclusively to tempo now, because you have to swap out that Wisp for another creature, and that other creature is not going to benefit control nearly as much. That's why everyone had Wisps. And also, the way that it's going to affect Vanar is going to be kind of strange, since it has Dying Wish. You won't be able to do the kind of the old, really ridiculous openings of like turn 1 play Wisp, turn 2 Jax. Those kind of things are out now, because it involves having that mana crystal from the beginning of your turn. And if it's dispelled, then you don't have the mana. If it dies on... so if it dies on your turn, do you get the mana, or are you able to use the mana on your turn? Or because that's another question: is if it dies on your turn and you don't get the mana, this could be really hard to use the card because they would have to kill it in order for you to utilize the mana right away anyway. So that'll be interesting to even see if the new Wisp is even usable. But overall, I think Vanar deserved it because of the state that they were in before. And now we get to see a lot more Control Vanar options. That being said, now I think they must have now the most removal, at least single target removal of any faction. It could be a really big contender for the Control faction, but I think that all the other ones got pushed down when Wisp got removed from them. So it's going to be a really interesting week.
Yeah, I mean, crazy week. Unfortunately, DCT is probably not going to come this next week, but it'll be the following week. So definitely just see what decks come out for that tournament for sure. So stay tuned. But with that, that's going to be it for myself, Paddo, Elmanbeastio in Atlanta, breaking down patch 0.26. Tune in next week.